number divided by the bottom number. And then when we did that, we had two kinds of decimals that we ended up with, right? Terminating ones, which meant what? They stopped. There was an ending point. And what was the other kind?
Repeating.
Repeating. And how did I show a repeating decimal? Put a line over whatever was repeating. Or at the end, if I wrote it out, I could use ... Right? Same. Two different ways of doing it. Then we got into talking about mixed numbers. Right? What was a mixed number?
1 and 3.
Whole number.
A whole number and a fraction.
A whole number and fraction. And how do I take that mixed number and turn it into an improper fraction? Ask.
You take the numerator times
No. The denominator times the whole number plus the numerator.
Plus the numerator, right? The bottom times the big number plus the top, and then always put it over the original denominator, okay? And then we can do the division there. Again, we like improper fractions from here on out. Those are good for us, okay? And then I believe this was the last thing. We're talking about inequality signs, right? These are inequality signs. And when we talk about inequality signs, we're talking about greater than or less than. And so remember, it always points towards the smaller one. It looks like it's going to eat up the bigger one. And you just have to make sure that you understand how you are reading it. I would always recommend reading it left to right. And if I have a chance where there's a variable in my problem, I'm always going to try to write that variable first. Because this inequality problem and this inequality problem are the exact same thing. But if I read them left to right, this says x is less than 7. This one says 7 is greater than x. They mean the exact same thing, but some people might not necessarily, that might not click in their head when you read it that way. Okay, so just be careful.
For equal to, can you have like a greater or less than sign with a line under it?
You can. We just haven't got to that part yet. We'll talk about that when we get to inequalities. Okay? So the last thing then that we were talking about were problems like this. We're going to compare. All right? And so the box, or maybe they'll put a circle or just a line there, that's what you're filling in with either your less than, your greater than, or your equals to today. So if you are given a decimal and a fraction in the problem, and you cannot tell what the answer is by just looking at it, then you want to convert both of them into the same thing. And so today I would probably recommend, and this is the only time I'm probably going to recommend this, turning your fractions into decimals. All right? So what's 13 over 20 as a decimal? Grace, punch it in your calculator. Oh, Kovac's got one today. Kovac, what do you got? 13 divided by 20. 0.65. So remember now, how do I know which one's bigger? Well, now it always, whatever number is farthest or closest to the decimal point is the biggest decimal place, right? Just because if we have a bunch of numbers here, that doesn't mean that that decimal is bigger than the other one. It's always the one closest to the decimal. What spot is this called? The tenths. What's the next one? Then what? Then what? 10,000s, right? Always put that TH at the end. Okay? So 7/10 is bigger than 65/100, right? Because the 7 is bigger than the 6. Okay? So again, we would come back and we would put our greater than symbol. Okay? If we look up here, yesterday we started talking about fractions that we should just kind of know now, right? So in this one, 1/4 was what as a decimal? 0.25. What was 1/3? 0.3. Repeating, right? So which one's bigger? If I have a third of something, or if I have a quarter of something, which one's bigger? A third's bigger, right? I'd much rather have a third of a pie than a fourth of a pie, if I'm hungry, right? So then Caleb yesterday said, well, can I have a negative sign? Yeah, I can have a negative sign. But then when I'm comparing them, Remember, the negatives are then actually the opposite, right? The bigger one's really the smaller one, essentially, right? So, again now, if I don't know these, I'm either going to turn them into decimals, or I could look at the fractions with common denominators, but we really haven't talked a whole lot about common denominators yet. So what's 3/4 as a decimal?
0.75.
0.75, and then don't forget your negative sign. And what was 7/8 yesterday? 0.875 with the negative sign. So which one's bigger? This one's bigger, right? Because of the negatives, right? So when you get to negatives, even though the number's bigger, it's really smaller, right? So this one we would say negative 0.75. So when we're talking about negatives, it's actually the one that's closest to 0 that's bigger. Make sense? We could do this, I don't have one up there, but we could do this with 2 3/7 compared to 3 1/4. Do I have to even do a whole lot to that one? Why?
Because 3 is bigger than 2.
3 is bigger than 2, right? I don't have to do much calculation to that. So then, what about if I switch my whole number to 2? Do I have to do a whole lot to that? Do I know right off the bat if 3/7 compared to 1/4 is bigger or smaller? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so if you don't, then we have to punch them into the calculator. What's 3 divided by 7?
Point 42857.
Alright, good enough. So 0.4285 something, 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 is that bigger or smaller than 0.25? Bigger. Alright? And again, we'll just stick it in there. Now, I don't have to turn these into improper fractions necessarily in that instance. But again, sooner or later we'd rather work with improper fractions than mixed numbers. Okay? So, then we have some story problems. Jeremy got a 16 out of 20 on his first quiz, and he got 20 out of 25 on his second quiz. What grade is higher? So, remember now, do you realize this? There's some ways when you're talking about grades especially. One way that I can figure out what my grade is take this number divided by this number, right? That's what we're talking about right now. And then we would move the decimal 2 places to the right. That's what somebody talked about yesterday, right? Or do you realize that I could say, if I had 20 and I wanted to get to 100, what would I do to 20 to get to 100? So I'm going to take each one that I miss and multiply it by 5 and then subtract. So I'm going to look at 16, I missed 4. So if I take 4 times 5 is 20. If I take 100 minus 20, what's my percent? I got an 80%. Been sitting next to galaxies.
I've been sitting next to Galaxy looks to the point where I can't comprehend it anymore.
No, I think y'all would sit next.
So what's 20 out of 25?
80.
What's 20 out of 25 for
Yeah.
your score?
80.
So what's my answer? What's grade higher? They're the same. Okay. 1/5 of the passenger trucks sold are pickups and 0.17 are SUVs. What is sold more? So what's 1/5 as a decimal? 0.2, right? Or 0.20? So which one's bigger? Are there more trucks or more SUVs sold? Trucks, right? Because 0.2 is bigger than 0.17. So again, just because there's 2 numbers in 0.17, 0.2 takes it because 2 is bigger than 1. Okay? Questions? Make sense with everything? The only ones we really got to take a little bit more time with are the negative ones. Okay, so even though the number's bigger, with a negative, it's really smaller. So those are the ones you want to take a little bit more time with. Any questions here? All right. So the rest of the